May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
A few weeks ago, I talked about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this American psychologist, and he said that we first need to make sure that we're surviving and have a certain amount of safety and security. And once that's secured, we move on and can enter into relationships and have personal accomplishments in life. And when we take care of that need, then he speculated people move on to what he called self-actualization. And then later he added a higher level that he talked about as transcendence. The thing though is if you're up there at self-awakening and transcendence, and you have problems with your relationships, or you have difficulty in your work, you need to go back down the hierarchy and deal with those lower levels. And if your security or your survival is threatened, you need to go down even further. You leave behind self-actualization and transcendence, and even relationships and accomplishments when you're in real danger. And that's logical. It makes sense. It's fairly abstract, but I understand what he's saying. The trouble is, with respect to spirituality, it really is quite problematic. It's almost too logical. It's too analytical. It's too individualistic, for one thing. It's all talked about from the position of an individual, taking care of their survival, moving into relationships, having good work, becoming self-actualized, transcending. It's a corporate ladder. It's a very American view based on progress and taking it one step at a time. And when you go up another step, you're assuming of the previous ones and doing whatever is on that step. They're separate, but it's onward and upward. It's like climbing a ladder. It's also a little too objective. The boundaries between these levels are too clear cut, and life doesn't work that way, really. I think that's part of what Jesus was getting at when he was talking about the Pharisees having it all set down. That you have to do this, this, and this, and then you'll be okay. They're clear rules that mark your progress and regression, that mark you passing a test or failing, that mark you being accepted by God or rejected by God. And that's not true of life in the Spirit. And thinking about that, I began to tinker with an idea of another hierarchy that addresses those problems, a hierarchy of values and meaning and soul that in some ways flips Maslow and that hierarchy on its head. In this hierarchy of values, our connection with God isn't found in some transcendent state that comes only at the end of our work, kind of an afterthought or a cherry on the sundae, but really at the beginning, in creation. That's what comes first. The hierarchy of value and meaning and soul isn't presented as logical, objective steps that some abstract individual needs to take care of, but rather the lived experience of being in the world. Reality as we know it. The world is already there when we're thrown into it. And my understanding of God really is as the source of that reality. When we get into touch with reality, we're really getting in touch with God and God's creation. So what for Maslow is this final step, for this other hierarchy is the first step, a foundation, a grounding in God, a grounding in spirit, a grounding in the eternal, the ultimate. That's the real starting point. I use that word God almost interchangeably with reality, because I think that's how we know God, when we know creation, or experiencing ourselves rather as a part of creation. Then we're getting into touch with God. We let go of descriptions. We let go of analysis. We let reality be the way it is and dwell in it the way it is. We feel the earth under our feet. We breathe the air without imposing some analytical structure or making some kind of judgment about it, without understanding it as a survival need or a relationship need or a transcendent need. Whatever is from God. So we just put ourselves into that experience, and really at this first step, try to let drop away all the things that get in the way of it. We're a part of that reality. We're not some isolated individual having an experience. We are that experience, and that experience is a seamless part of this foundation of truth, reality, God. So just be for a while. It's okay. Just breathe. There's nothing wrong, you know. God is in charge. It's all okay. Regardless of what we think, just be in that. It is what it is. That's a true statement. Value and meaning and soul are then further refined in relationships. And relationships arise when we begin to be aware that we're aware. We've worked at standing in creation and reality without putting intellectual barriers between ourselves and that, but we become aware of that. And that's the beginning of the potential for relationship. Our first relationship is with God. Our first relationship is with where we are, and we begin that communication. And then the relationships extend out to the surrounding world, to what are called self-objects or other objects in the world. We notice the sky, the sea, the trees. We hear the thunder. We feel the heat. All this is a part of our context that we begin to be aware of while not leaving that foundation. It's not really like we step up another level, but we add it to the first. And in that, we finally relate to other people. And that's a special kind of relationship, because it's another point of consciousness, another point of experience interchanging with us. And it's a very miraculous thing to think about. From those relationships, we often start to be aware of our particular talents. Rather than seeing accomplishments and work and ability as another kind of feather in our cap, another pat on the back or award we get, step on the hierarchy, step up the ladder. What this is in terms of accomplishment, it comes through discernment. We discern what are our unique gifts. What do we have to contribute? Not how do we measure up, but how do we express ourselves? How do we offer our offering? And that's what we bring to ability. And it goes back and forth as our life goes on. We find our worth, we make our contribution. And only then do we come in a way to where Maslow started, with the body. Not quite in the same way though. Maslow begins with the body, or at least that's implied in his putting survival and security first in the hierarchy. But when I'm talking about the body, it's an awareness of the coming together of all of these streams that come up from God, that come to us from experience in the world, that are contributed by other people experiencing the world. It's the body of Christ. It's the incarnate body that God took on in the life of Jesus. It's the spiritual body that St. Paul talks about, enters into resurrection. For me, the best way to distinguish between this understanding and Maslow's understanding is to look at the difference between the Greek words bios, and zoe. Both mean life. But bios, but like in biology, is just physical life. Is just the breathing and the eating and the sleeping and the natural things that really are at the heart of Maslow's understanding of a needy individual. Zoe, rather, is the spark of life, the spirit of life, that special something that happens when God breathes spirit into human beings, into the world. And that is not simply by a biological existence. It's a swirling, it's an awareness of a swirling, pulsing creation. And when you think about it, that too is miraculous. But our bodies are the locus for all that coming together. It's like a transformer, maybe, where things come into our experience and we go out. This is the vehicle through which that happens on a spiritual level. And I've talked about this as an alternate hierarchy, but really it's not a hierarchy. I mean, I use Maslow's understanding. What it seems to be more as I work on it are concentric circles. We begin at the center with our being in the world and move out to relationships and discernment of our uniqueness, and then sharing that with the world through the transformer of our body. Our skin becomes a connection rather than a separation from everything. And we move out more than we move up. Of course, Maslow is right. I mean, even if he's analytical, he points out some true stuff. If we can't breathe, we're not going to be in really good relationships or accomplish very much, even our own unique special gifts. My wife Molly and I were watching a TV show that we liked last night, and all of a sudden the power went off. We couldn't see the show. But the show isn't the TV. The TV set wasn't working. But even when the TV set is working, it's not the show. You need those pixels and wires and electronics and everything to convey the show, but the show is something different. Need can take us only so far. But value and meaning and soul are really why we're here. Thanks be to God.